And at this time, I'm going to have Ken Gotsch provide an overview for the trustees in response to a question that has recently come up about potential tuition models that we may want to consider, not for the current budget year, but as we move forward beyond fiscal year 20. So Ken's going to walk you through some homework that he's been doing.
Thank you. I was given the assignment from the board at the February planning retreat to explore some of the community college index models where the boards have adopted an index to use as a vehicle for setting tuition each year. And so the goal for today is to present you the information we've gathered and then seek your guidance for next step. So basically, when we look at board policy 420, our current board policy tuition and fees, it really just establishes the fact that the board is authorized to set tuition and fees and doesn't provide any other guidance beyond that. So it seems like our practice has been to come to the board each year with a per credit hour tuition request. We discuss it, the board makes a decision, and we kind of go forward. But by looking at indexing approaches that we've seen in two other community colleges, we thought we'd at least present to the board several indexing options to consider. We're going to discuss the Consumer Price Index, which is used by the property tax extension law. And we're also going to discuss the two other indexes that other colleges are using. One of the components of an index used by the Harper colleges, they use the gross national product deflator and the higher education cost adjustment, which is a component of the GMP deflator and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Cost Change Index. So those are two. And then the third is the Higher Education Price Index, which is used by the Land of Lincoln Community College. And so here's just some basic overview of what's in that particular index. And then finally, I've summarized it all for you on this grid right here. You can see the P-tax law uses the CPI, which is a December to December comparison. And if we would have used that index for this year's tuition increase, we would have been limited to 1.5%. The Harper College model uses the Higher Education Cost Adjustment Index, or what's called HECA, and it's prepared by the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. And it's composed of two components. 75% of it is the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Cost Change Index. 25% is based on the U.S. Bureau of Economic Affairs GMP price deflator. And if we were to use that method this year, our tuition increase would have been limited to a 1.98% increase. And then the Lincoln Land Community College board policy is a function of the ICCP state tuition average of the prior year plus adjusting it for the Higher Education Price Index. So if our board had authorized us to use the Lincoln Land Community College model, this year's tuition could have grown by about 2.68%. What's interesting about the Harper College model, though, is they have a cap, so that if an index in the given year happened to go above 5%, we'd be limited to 5%. The Harper model also was, they originally had used the CPI or the Illinois property tax model, and then they've adjusted it recently to include the HECA model. So their board, and their board also revisits their tuition policy every 5 years, so that seemed like a nice feature of any potential change we might make. Where the Lincoln Land Community College model is, their distinguishing feature is off of the state tuition average and adjusting it using a slightly broader measure of inflation. And then just to kind of round out the conversation, we came to the board at the spring retreat, and we requested a $4 per credit hour request, and that would have been about almost 3% increase. And the board at the, I believe it was the February board meeting, approved a $3 per credit hour change, and that would have translated to about a 2% increase, just to kind of put those various measures in perspective. In your folders, I put all of our homework in here. You'll have the not only today's presentation, but the tuition and fee history for the college going back over a 30-year period. We also have specific language for the Harper College policy in your folder, as well as the Lincoln Land board policy in the folder. And then I've also stuck in some articles about the different indexes and some of the pros and cons of using them. What I don't have in the folder, though, is the background information on the Lincoln Land policy index. I just haven't been able to complete the research to complete that component of it, but there's at least enough here for tonight's purposes to at least give you a framework for the research that we've conducted and what we're seeing in the data. For example, on this slide, I just wanted to point out, you can see the impact of the Lincoln Land decision Right now, we're at $141. Our peer colleges are at $142, which is the guide that our current board direction is to try to stay within our peers. And then the Lincoln Land model would take us up another couple dollars to start there and then kind of index off of that. The other thing I wanted to share with you is what does the data look like? If we look at these three indexes that we're talking about today over a 10-year period, you'll see that the most conservative of the three is the property tax index or the consumer price index. The one that's kind of in the middle is the Harper index, the HECA model that has 75% of a federal CPI index and 25% of the deflator measure. And then the Lincoln Land model seems to be the incorporates the most growth, and that's the one that's solely based on a higher education inflation measure. And then I overlaid this trend to give you that sense of looking at our changes in our tuition as a college, and you can see that the colleges, either tuition change or tuition fee changes, either were above the line or above the indexes or below the indexes. And if you kind of just eyeball it, you can see most likely over that period of time we probably were growing faster than the three. We did get a trustee request to look at this in terms of the data, how the data would look. So when I converted all that information to a 2010 base year, and with the CLC tuition being the purple line, you can see that we would have been above the three indexes that we were comparing our measure to. Though this particular presentation, I wasn't able to figure out how to incorporate in the Lincoln Land adjustment to the state average because I couldn't get quick access to the state average data that we had heated off of. So I suspect that orange line would have gone up by about $3 or $4 and then grown over time. But I still think it gives you a good sense of how the dollars would have looked using these various methods. And it's also important to note too that we know from our competitors. I remember at the when we did our tuition discussion, I shared some slide regarding our peer groups borrowing for capital purposes, and a number of our peers like Harper have gone to the voters. They've had approved various referendums to fund capital, so they were able to rely for their capital work on another source of revenue, where our colleges traditionally relied on operating savings and our tuition and fees to kind of fund our debt and our outstanding bonds. So that could explain some of the differences in the approaches, or something we might want to at least take into consideration as we look at the different models. How do we address the total cost of the college's needs? And then finally, I just thought about looking at some of the benefits and the risks and the challenges of the different approaches. So I was suggesting from the benefit side, there's a certain short-term predictability to looking at an index approach. It certainly helps us tracks the cost of providing our student and community services. We know it does limit the growth of our future tuition requests because it's an index and it's kind of constraining our ability to go above it. But it also sets future minimum resources for improved planning, so that's certainly a potential benefit. And then the risks and the challenges are kind of noted there. There's a certain predictability of some of these indexes. I know with the CPI this past December, when the federal government shut down for a period of time, that did draw that measure down by a good 2 or 3 percentage points that affected the outcome we would have received normally. And we also know that with that indexing model, a challenge would be is how do we address some of the broader student needs and resource needs if we're kind of constraining ourselves to a particular formula. So those would be some of the trade-offs to consider. We know, so I guess bottom line, a tuition policy such as Harper or Lincoln Land certainly helps with planning, but we know it's not a silver bullet either. So it's pros and cons. So at this point, I guess the guidance we'd be hoping from the board is this research taking us in the right direction. Is there more information you'd like us to pull together? And then also the priorities and objectives would the board like for us to reflect in a tuition policy that we bring back forward, and if there's any other next steps you might want to consider.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's a lot of data, and I'm glad to see it, read it, whatever. We have a 50-year history at the College of Lake County of raising tuition, basically based on our needs, what's going on with the state, what's going on with the local property taxes, and inflation. And we use the CPI, which is a current, up-to-date measure of what's going on in the economy. I mean, it's not something from a long period of time, and I don't really see a problem with the way we do tuition increases at this point in time at the College of Lake County. What you said, and I think was really, really important, it was kind of a throwaway, was how we do fund buildings. I mean, we just went through, what, 180 million in building construction with no going to the taxpayers and asking them for any money. I mean, we're working on our tax rate from when the college was first founded. We should be very proud of that, very proud of that. And what we do with tuition, we're right there in the middle with our peers. So, you know, these numbers and processes, I served on this board when interest rates were 18%. 18%, think if you were limited to 5% like the Harper model, where would we be today? We'd be giving tuition increases as high as we can and probably get rid of our policies because we would have had nothing to go back on and take care of an 18% inflation rate. Everything went up. Utilities, the cost of paper, everything. And I don't like, I like flexibility. I don't like to be confined in. So this is great work, but on the other hand, we've done a pretty good job getting us to this point where we are today. Plus Harper is talking about 40-60% budget surpluses. We talk about a 30% budget surplus. So that's another big takeaway from this. So that's my opinion as one board member.
Well, you put this together because of the questions that some board members had where they wanted more information, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's good research, and I wasn't aware that our
Yeah.
peers had an alternative, and I think the information is helpful. I can envision a future board planning retreats bringing those statistics back just as a guidepost. I think it's helpful to know.
Yeah, and I think I was probably one of the trustees that was asking the original question, and it was couched in, as you know, we all have to run for re-election as well. And if you've seen my voting record over the last 30 years, I'm not sure I've ever voted for a tuition increase. And when engaging with other trustees across the state, saying, hey, they have stuff built into policy, so they never ever have to vote on whether to raise tuition or not. And having said that, we've never had this information before, so I appreciate you putting it together. And as the outgoing board member, for another board to make this decision, I totally agree with what Rich said. When we look at the state not giving us, not having a budget for 2.5 years, and building buildings and inflation, the last thing in the world that we want to do is to tie our hands so we can't continue with the great service we do for the community. Things not only with the inflation and buildings and whatever, but then you look at those added pieces like the Performing Arts Center. So I think there's a lot to be said for if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But at least now we have the information to maybe go down the road if we want to discuss it further, or the next board wants to discuss it further, that's great. But from what I'm seeing right now, I'm thinking what we're doing is pretty darn good.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes, I have a couple. I agree with my fellow board members. I do not see any direct correlation between CPI and what would be a reasonable approach for us at the community college level. I do think there is great value in the board grappling with tuition on an annual or every other year basis, simply because it sharpens our focus on the dollars and cents aspect of the organization, and it makes us be thoughtful around every dollar we spend and every dollar we ask others to spend on our behalf. So I actually think that is a healthy debate, even though it can be kind of difficult at times. So I personally do not feel that adding the same framework that you so thoughtfully laid out before us tonight would add value to our organization. I do still like the idea of having a 2-year look, if that's a possibility from a planning perspective, administratively. I know if I were sitting in your seats, I would like to have a diagnostic ability to know 2 years for sure what my budget's going to look like. And then also just glancing at your wonderful data, most often the increases have been around the 3% or under 5% when possible, and sometimes under 2%. actually quite frequently, with some outliers where there were some high years as well, which again goes back to Trustee Anderson's points. So I would like to see us tied to an index. I would like to see a 2-year possibility for a prediction. I do also like the idea of having the habit of benchmarking data. Not necessarily to say we're going to do like our peers are doing or use that same percentage, but I think we ought to stay in that neighborhood.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ken.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. And that concludes our report.
Thank you, Dr. Suddick.